Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is about 1:04 p.m. on Friday, December 8th, 2023. This is the meeting of the 2019 HB 737 Commission for the Study of Environmental and Health Effects of PFAS Chemicals. And so we are calling this meeting to order. We have a quorum. And so let us proceed with approval of the November 17, 2023 minutes. Thank you, Don, for doing that. It's always an extremely burdensome but much appreciated task.
I'd say it was my pleasure, but I'd be not accurate.
Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns? If not, we'll take a motion to approve. Gary, okay. Motion by Gary, and is there a second? Second by Nancy. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Aye. Okay, and is anyone on the phone at this point?
Yes, this is Representative Lascelles. I approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little late.
No, we heard the unfortunate circumstances. So no worries, and I guess we are all set with that. Thank you. Mike Wimsatt, would you like to give us your update?
Sure. Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. So for the update, we met just 3 weeks ago. There are some new updates to share. I'll try to sort of focus on the new information. My notes that I'll provide to the clerk will contain the usual sort of more broad background information for people's reading reference, but I'll try to focus really on the new information in terms of what I say. So as far as the Air Division, the Air Resources Division's update, as I mentioned last time, we did have a multimedia site visit with all of our divisions represented back on November 16th, right before our previous meeting. And that went well, was very helpful. And with regard to stack testing activities, of course, the annual stack test did take place in September, and 2 DES staff members were present to observe. A final report on that was submitted to the agency on November 20th, just after our last meeting, and it's currently being reviewed by department staff. And since our last update to the commission, there have been no bypass events that have been reported to the agency. So with respect to the closure, again, we did make that visit in November. As discussed at the last meeting, we understand that Saint-Gobain has hired Ramboll Engineering, which is a global engineering firm, to assist it with its plant closure planning and activities. We understand that a meeting with Ramboll occurred within the last week, so they have got them on board now. And that the work with them will commence to plan and implement the closure activities. We were told that the manufacturing at the facility would likely conclude by the end of Q1, so the end of March of 2024, and that they would expect to complete all their closure, cleaning and decontamination and removal of materials by the end of the calendar year 2024. And again, we'll be communicating with them regularly and keeping tabs on that to make sure that that goes as we would anticipate. With regard to the Waste Management Division's update, we always talk a little bit about the POA installation process. And as of November 30th, 536 POET systems have been installed. And at this time, the company's contractors have been able to install nearly all the POET systems for the properties where the property owners were responsive to the initial contractor notification letters. Saint-Gobain's contractors begun notifying properties listed under the term sheets 11 to 16, and we're up to 17 term sheets now, so they're getting caught up. And we'll also be sending out second notices to property owners that are eligible to receive POETs, but who didn't respond to the first mailing. And as we've talked about in the past, those POET installations are not considered entirely complete until they demonstrated that they're working effectively and treating the water effectively. So to date, approximately 488 of those 536 POET systems are considered officially complete. So that's good news. So Saint-Gobain has also, if we move on to talk about the rebate program, where they would be offering rebates to customers who elected to put in POET systems prior to being notified that they were eligible for one from the company. They've indicated that they received approximately 30 reimbursement requests, and they expect to be, they'll be working to notify residents of the eligibility determinations for that this month. So we expect that by the time we meet again in the new year, we should have some updates on what the results of that were. Saint-Gobain is proceeding with design work for waterline installations for the towns of Litchfield, Bedford, and Merrimack. A notice to proceed for construction was granted in October by Saint-Gobain for the Hillcrest Road area water main extension in Litchfield. And the water main and curb stop installations have now been completed on Rocky Hill Road, Shirley Way, and Hillcrest Road North and west of Meadowbrook Lane. The water main construction east of Meadowbrook Lane is expected to continue this month, weather permitting. And the water utility held a pre-construction meeting for the water service connections on November 29th and anticipates that connections will begin by later this month, late December, and continue through the winter, weather permitting. The contractors have estimated that that work will approximately take 6 months to complete. Saint-Gobain's been working with the utility company to complete the design work for service connections to existing water mains in the towns of Bedford and Londonderry. Bids have been received for that work, and the water utility has selected a contractor. Saint-Gobain is working to finalize contract documents currently. Their consultant has finalized design packages for extensions and connections to existing water mains for the Merrimack, Wildcat, Brenda Lane area and associated service connections. That bid process was initiated in early November on the 6th, and their contractors indicated it'll be a 30-day bidding process. So I'm assuming that means it's probably more or less come to conclusion at this point, or right around now. And that it's likely that work will be conducted in early 2024. Both projects are estimated to take approximately 3 to 4 months and be completed by late spring of 2024. Saint-Gobain's working with the water utility in the town of Londonderry to evaluate the feasibility of water line connections in the town. The conceptual design was completed by the water utility on behalf of the company last April, and DES has met with Saint-Gobain, the town of Londonderry, and the water utility in November to discuss expanding water service in that area. That's a pretty big project, and Londonderry is communicating with the company about how costs will be shared for that. There's an effort and a desire to expand water beyond the areas where Saint-Gobain is responsible for providing connections. Londonderry is taking an active role in that, and they've also applied for some supplemental funding to assist with that long-term expansion of municipal water in the town. So we're going to be working on that in the coming year for sure. That's going to be an important part of our work to look at expanding water in Londonderry. As discussed in previous commission meetings, DES agreed to allow Saint-Gobain to delay submittal of its application for a groundwater management permit until they had completed a second round of sampling for all the drinking water wells in the study area. And that sampling is nearly complete, and the groundwater management app is due in May of 2024. So that'll be some important work that'll be happening this coming year. DES has been periodically receiving updated proposals from the company to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area following the initial agreements in April and June of 2022. So this includes term sheet, the latest term sheet attachment is number 17. So it keeps getting amended as they get new information about additional properties. So that was received in November and reviewed by DES. That attachment includes an updated list of remedies for all properties that have occurred since the April 22 proposal. And we anticipate a new proposal to augment that. Presumably attachment 18 will be submitted by the company in early 2024. So as reported at each meeting, we're now up to and don't confuse the 17, they happen to both be 17s. There are 17 attachments to the agreement for providing alternate water, but there's also the work plan for residential well sampling, which happens to have 17 addenda that we've received so far. And so we're up to 17 addenda relative to the resampling of wells that previously tested between 10 parts per trillion and non-detect. There's so far as of November 10th, 1,124 such samples have been collected, and that represents about 95% of the targeted properties. We don't have all the data on that yet, but at least the sampling is getting completed, getting pretty near complete. And so far with the data we do have, as I reported previously, between 5 and 10% of those wells have shown results above that exceed the drinking water standard. So those properties have been offered bottled water, and they will be provided with alternate water remedies that will be selected for them. And then if we talk about previously unsampled wells within the consent decree area, we've continued, and I've talked about this earlier, to express a need for additional sampling to complete, an addendum to complete sampling of all the water supply wells within the consent decree area. We asked for that formally in a letter in June, and we required that they complete the sampling of all water supply wells located within the outer boundary of the consent decree. They've not agreed to conduct that sampling, so we're still at odds on that. We did meet with Saint-Gobain representatives in August on the topic, and we are expecting to hear from them very soon and probably have a meeting in December or January to see how that's going to get reconciled. And I will tell you, and we've shared with them, we're getting very impatient about that, and that's something that's going to need to get resolved promptly. So hopefully we'll have more to report to you on that when we meet in the new year. As of November 30th, there's with addendum 17 updated, these are the statistics, and they'll be, of course, in the notes. 3,844 properties have been identified for sampling. That's not a change because we only met 3 weeks ago, so this is the same base numbers that we're talking about. 3,833 access agreements have been sent, and that again represents a return rate of around 70%. And 2,461 samples were collected from water supply wells. That's 12 more than the October report. And 1,124 second samples have been collected from water supply wells. And again, that's that number I referenced before for the wells that are between ND and 10 parts per trillion. And many of those have been done, over 900 of those were collected just since June. So they've been making great progress on that. And then a total of 1,118 properties were offered bottled water, and that's 7 more than the October report. And lastly, again, we've talked about this before, a remedial action plan was submitted back in May, and we expect to receive an addendum to that this month. We've not yet received it, but we do expect that we will be meeting with the company and their consultants later this month to discuss the content. So hopefully I'll have something more concrete to report on that when we meet again in the new year. And that's what I have. My notes will include the usual graphics regarding remedy implementation. And I'm happy to say we've got at least the numbers we're reporting now that look a lot more encouraging. You can look at the graphics when you get the notes, but in terms of implementing the POET remedies, overall, not quite 70%, 68.8% of the POET remedies have been implemented. And if you break that down by town, it's about 71% in Merrimack, 76% in Londonderry, 77% in Litchfield, 75% in Hudson, and 65% in Bedford. And then obviously less progress on the water line connections, which are still pending as described earlier. But you'll see those represented in a variety of graphic formats when you see the notes from this meeting. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Gary?
You had reference to the stack activity. I guess I have not clear in my own mind, and it may impact how their closure is carried out. And some of the factors that came to mind was in terms of the stack, how's that going to be active? Is it going to during the entire shutdown? I sort of very a simplistic perspective as they're cleaning up the site and their equipment, they could stir up a lot of PFAS chemicals. And therefore, I would assume and would certainly hope the stack is going to be functional throughout the entire closure process. That may or may not be true. I don't know. That's one question. Second question, when the stack is down, we're getting a bolus of PFAS material. And is there any idea how that affects the short term versus long term in terms of if you have a bolus of material, obviously, if you're in the area, you would measure an increase in the atmosphere. How big a window is of really importance? In other words, a 30-second failure is different than a 30-hour and a 30-day. Do we have any idea how much that stack time impacts the short term versus the long term? How far does that set us back?
Well, let me take your first question first. Yeah, to be clear, the stack test was conducted on what we call the RTO, the regenerative thermal oxidizer. And that is very specifically connected to the series of essentially 5 towers, the production towers that they operate. So if you were to see a tour of the facility, you see that there's this sort of big, almost sort of vertically oriented device that is, if you've ever seen a paper machine and all the rollers and pinch and all that and everything, it's sort of like they took a paper machine and stood it on its end instead of having it laid out horizontally. And those stacks, those devices actually roll a sheet of whether it's in most cases it may be a nylon or a polyester or a fiberglass fabric that is the intent of the whole purpose of the manufacturing device is to coat that fabric with a thin, sort of very specific thickness coating of Teflon, basically, or some related Teflon product. And basically that goes through a dip tank and coats the sheet, and then it goes up through a series of ovens that help to cure that Teflon to the sheet. And then there are emissions that come off in those ovens that then go into the stacks or the duct work that's connected to the regenerative thermal oxidizer, which I'll call the RTO from now on. So that RTO will continue to operate as long as they are manufacturing. It does not collect or treat what you might call fugitive emissions from the site. It is only intended to address the very specific emissions that come off of those 5, the series of 5 production devices, manufacturing devices. So the answer is yes, the RTO will continue to operate as long as they're manufacturing, but after that, it will be shut down, and it wouldn't matter anyways, because it only is designed to collect the emissions from the manufacturing operations. So my understanding from talking to them at our meeting is that that RTO will continue to operate, and then once they shut down manufacturing, the RTO will be shut down as well, as long as along with all the other manufacturing equipment. And then the RTO, as I understand, is probably going to be shipped to another facility and repurposed. All that equipment associated with the manufacturing, as we understand it, will be removed from the site and either, brought to or sold to another manufacturer or sent to scrap. Essentially, it will not remain at the site. And what we learned from them at our meeting, which was really helpful to understand, is that what they seem to be looking to do is to deliver at closure, which will take until the end of 2024, a empty facility, which will essentially contain no manufacturing equipment, none of the infrastructure that they use for doing their processes. All the machines and devices will either be repurposed or scrapped. And then the only thing they're going to leave there is a treatment system, a closed loop water treatment system that they're currently using to treat wastewaters in the facility. And they think that might well have some value. It'll be decontaminated to remove PFAS contamination, but they expect that it could be of some use to a new future owner of the site if the site were sold at some point. They also have indicated that they plan to basically take all the subsurface plumbing and grout it closed, so that anybody who goes in there and repurposes the facility is going to have to put in their own plumbing systems. They don't want any of their plumbing systems to be repurposed, essentially. So that's my understanding. So that, I think, answers your first question.
Yeah,
The second
basically,
question,
simplistically, once the manufacturing is started, the remainder of the closure process, there is insufficient concern or about stirring the dust in a simplistic way that's going to cause any concern.
we don't know exactly what we'll be continuing to communicate with them. I'm not sure I think a lot of the decontamination procedures, if you will, for tanks and things like that are going to be rinsing and cleaning operations that aren't necessarily going to be, stirring up dust, so to speak. I mean, I don't think they're going to, it would be my hope they're not going to be doing, uncontrolled sandblasting or something of equipment. I'm not, we'll look at that. I mean, I think that's something they're going to be concerned about as well. But I think really
I was just concerned about a big bolus of PFAS materials during this non-manufacturing process. And I just wanted some confirmation that people that are looking at this issue are, after the stack is no longer functioning and the shutdown is occurring, that we're not stirring up enough to be of concern that other processes have to be put in place.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that there's going to be a significant release associated with that. I mean, I think if we look at the past history of the facility, the real, releases that were really impactful would have been the releases that occurred from those manufacturing operations prior to an RTO being installed and prior to any changes in chemistry. So if you go back to the 80s and 90s, there were very significant concentrations of PFAS in their formulations and very little in the way of emissions controls on those operations. And that's why we have the widespread releases of PFAS that have impacted soil and groundwater in such a large area. But I don't have reason to believe that, if you look at it in the context of that, I don't think that what may happen I don't have any reason to believe that what happens over the next year will be meaningful in terms of that, any releases that might occur. But that's something we'll continue to look at. We plan to be in, very regular communication with them about their operations and what they're going to be doing to conduct plant closure.
Rosemary, you were waiting.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank
And
you.
Lorraine, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, Mike. One, the sampling that's been done, are those results still being posted to the map on the DES website, the PFAS site? Remember, I haven't checked it in a while, but you could see the points of where private wells were tested and what the concentration was.
I believe all that data is being posted and is continually updated.
Okay, and then just another question I had is, do you expect that the communication process that you have with Saint-Gobain will change once they've exited the site? I mean, your contacts, do you anticipate the same level of responsiveness from them when they exit the site as you have now?
I do. We certainly expect that, and we'll demand it. I mean, I will tell you that our primary contact doesn't even work at the plant. They're based out of Hoosick Falls, so his situation really won't change when the plant closes. He'll still be responsible for communicating with us and keeping us updated. And whether or not the plant is operating, I don't think really has much impact on that.
Okay, thank you.
Lorraine, Go ahead.
I don't think this is under your jurisdiction, and I don't think it's under DHHS jurisdiction, but maybe, I don't know if you would consider reaching out or partnering, or if it's allowed or appropriate in New Hampshire to coordinate with OSHA. One of my concerns is, as they go through this process, worker safety and gear and protective items have not been tuned into at Saint-Gobain. That's a long-term issue there. People are assured that everything's fine. And my concern is, as they wind down and whoever they're using to do these activities, I would really like us to just do what we can to ensure that those workers have protection. That's really important to me. Those are people that have been, we don't talk about those folks, you know, and they're really overlooked, and their health issues are there. I've talked to several people through the years, and I think that is OSHA, but how are they gonna, they don't come in unless someone asks them to. So is there a way that we can ensure that attention is paid to that? Because if you made that request, they don't have to listen to it, right? Because it's not under your authority.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, what I can tell you is that, you know, in a general sense, setting aside Saint-Gobain, you know, we regulate, as you know, facilities all across the state for both air, water, and waste issues. And, you know, in my time as a hazardous waste inspector, we would occasionally go to a facility where we saw things that really concerned us that we didn't necessarily have the authority to regulate. But we would reach out to OSHA and say, hey, you really ought to take a look at these guys. It looks like what they're doing is kind of dangerous. So we have a history of doing that. We didn't have to do it a lot, but we would occasionally come across conditions like that we felt rose to the level of needing to contact OSHA and make them aware of it. With respect to this, I mean, I think the primary exposure issues at any plant, you know, the more of the material you use, the higher your exposure risks are, right? So the fact that they're going to be ceasing operations and shipping off a lot of these materials is probably, you know, in general should result in whatever risks or exposure there should go down. But certainly, as we do this, if we see or hear of things that concern us in terms of worker safety or exposure that we think, you know, are really of a concern to us that we don't feel we have the authority to address, we wouldn't hesitate to reach out to OSHA to let them know that.
Questions for Mike? If not, I'll just ask this,
I think
Mike.
Don, sorry, Chris, I think Don raised his hand.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, thank you. Kind of just taking off on the what Lorene was talking about and the post-closure process. I remember there was an enforcement action a year or two ago about the cleaning of the roof and drains and some other things. I'm not sure if you remember if that has been done particularly. I'm thinking about the building and even the interior of the building. You know, there's the dip pan itself, that material that's going to be cleaned out. I'm hoping that's not going to be just shipped off into a landfill somewhere, particularly here in Merrimack. You know, I don't think there's any way to prevent that, but we certainly wouldn't want to see that happen. And then as far as the walls and everything itself, I gotta think that there's got to be some kind of residue in the building. Is there going to be like post testing of anything like that to see if the material has been adequately removed or anything? I mean, someone touches the walls and then touches their face, you know, that's the soup. It's so super concentrated as the raw product in there. That's why I'm kind of asking these questions. There was a lot of questions in there, but I think you kind of get my idea. Is what post-closure testing has anybody contemplated that process?
Yeah, those are great questions, and that's what we started to talk with them about when we met with them. I mean, I think their primary focus in terms of planning their closure is they really want to remove everything. I mean, there is one of the towers where we thought there was probably the most evidence of, you know, potentially parts of the structure being impacted, is actually going to be entirely disassembled and removed from the site. So that's encouraging. The specifics of how that's going to happen or what level of, you know, decontamination of the surfaces might be appropriate or necessary still needs to be worked out. And you know, I'll be honest with you, I was really pleased to hear them say and acknowledge that they're really looking at probably a full year of activities to really, they're going to be done manufacturing presumably by the end of the first quarter, but they recognize they're not going to be able to finish doing what they're doing until probably the end of the calendar year. So there'll be a lot more discussion about those issues and getting into the details of how that's going to happen.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Mike? I don't see any. So, Mike, I think it'd be really nice to have a graphical representation of the resampling data on, I'll call it a GIS layer, so we can correlate where we see changes, good, bad, or no change in those two ranges. So the non-detects to 10s and the 10s to 12, so we can see where maybe geographically there are issues, or if the data is not susceptible to geographical correlations. That's good to know too.
Sure. Yeah, I'll get with Andy on this and see if there's something we can provide either for the, perhaps for the next meeting. Try to give you some graphic vision or a geographic representation of that, if that's something that we can do.
It can wait till the resampling's done. But I think at some point.
Yeah, that might be better. But we'll start looking at that and see if we've got kind of the geolocated information as well as the data. We can put together something like that. Be happy to look at that.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions for Mike, we'll get an update from Leanne. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I've got a little bit of an update since our last meeting. So we're still working on the contract with the academic partner for the phase 3 feasibility study in the Merrimack area. We are anticipating that contract is going to be on the governor and council agenda on December 20th and for approval. So hopefully that makes it on the agenda, and we'll have more of an update to share at our next meeting. The contract is expected to be completed by June 30th, 2025. It does have a 2-year extension that's available in the event that we need additional time to complete the study, but we are planning, at this point, to have the study finished by June 30th, 2025. But we did add that extension option in case it was needed. And, the contracting process has been delayed because of working out the details and logistics about privacy and security around the data that are going to be collected during the study. The next update is a follow-up on the ATSDR health consultation. And at our last meeting was the same day that the health consultation for the PFAS in private wells near the St. Gobain facility was finalized. And there were some statements and comments from the commission at the last meeting about wondering about the status of the health consultation for public water users, and then also about the status of the NASEM, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's recommendations on PFAS testing. So following the meeting, we followed up with our partners, our apple tree partners at DES, to reach out to ATSDR to get an update. And our understanding is that ATSDR is still reviewing the draft health consultation report for public water users, and it's likely months out from release. The apple tree will be coordinating with ATSDR on public outreach when it is released. Hopefully something similar to what was provided for the draft health consultation for private well users. We also made them aware of the comments related to finalizing the NASEM recommendations. They didn't have any more updates on that, but they did indicate that they're still working on reviewing that, and they'll be updating their website once they finish their review. And that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, thank you.
I don't see any questions for Leanne, so Maureen, if you will give us your, oh, okay, Rosemary.
A question just came to mind. Leanne, do you expect that there might be any opposition when it gets to governor and council? I mean, would it behoove us to reach out to our executive counselors to request that they support the contract?
That's a good question. I don't know. I've not been involved with the details of that. I know that it is, you know, the partner is a you know, someone that's really familiar with the state cancer registry. So I'm not sure if they're anticipating any concerns, but I can check and get back to you on that.
That'd be great. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I'd be happy to reach out to our executive counselor. I may just do it anyway, just to make sure he knows that this is a priority for our community. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions for Leanne? Okay, seeing none, Maureen, please give us an update on legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to members of the commission. I'm going to start with the 2023 PFAS legislation tracking chart. There are 4 bills that I mentioned last time that were retained and will be taken up by the legislature in January. Now, those 4 bills will be taken up either January 3rd or 4th. That is when we as a House will meet. The bills are all on the consent calendar, which, by the way, will be mailed to all of the legislators probably next week or so. So everybody will get a copy of the calendar in the mail, as I understand it. It will be taking up on January 3rd and 4th. The 4 bills on that 2023 chart are House Bill 398 with an ought to pass with amendment recommendation. That is regarding prior to selling real estate. House Bill 414 with an ITL recommendation. That's related to health insurance coverage. House Bill 242. That's banning food packaging. That's an interim study recommendation. And the last one is House Bill 465, and that is related to consumer products with an interim study recommendation. So that is the summary there of the 2023 tracking chart, and action will soon be taken on those. Okay, that leads to the 2024 chart, which has had considerable movement and update since we last met. First of all, there are now 11 bills on that chart. You may recall there were 13. The reason why is because now the deadline to sign off has passed. Some bills, or LSRs rather, have been withdrawn or consolidated. So the list is now 11 to my count. The bills, or the LSRs, are starting to get bill numbers. And as of yesterday, I have checked very diligently as to which bills on the 2024 tracking chart have been assigned numbers. As of yesterday, there are 4. And I've put links to those in the chart as of yesterday. One thing before I go through them is I want to note just how spread out the bills will be next year on our chart. All 4 of these bills that have been assigned numbers are in 4 different committees. So I'll start with House Bill 114, excuse me, House Bill 1114, 1114. That is to extend this commission. That has been assigned to Resources, Recreation, and Development. House Bill 1170. That is related to public benefit and impact assessments. That's been referred to Environment and Agriculture. House Bill 1089. That is going to essentially wipe out the 6-year extension on bringing civil claims for a statute of limitation on PFAS cases, which was just implemented last term. And it would then make the statute of limitations essentially non-existent because it would start running at any time at the discovery of the injury of PFAS. That's been assigned to Judiciary. And then House Bill 1171. That's to extend the Commission of Environmentally Triggered Concerns. And that's been assigned to Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs. So out of the 11 on the 2024 chart so far, only 4, as of yesterday, have been assigned bill numbers and committees. So we'll continue to watch that, and it'll continue to be updated, likely before January. Everything should have a number. And then just as a follow-up from the last meeting we had, it was discussed what the deadline was for Senate bills. Yesterday was the deadline for co-sponsors to sign off on Senate LSRs. So as of today, all the deadlines have passed in terms of signing off on LSRs in both the House and the Senate. I think that will do it. That will conclude my legislative report this month. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission members.
All right, thank you very much, Maureen. A lot of activity there to monitor. So if there are no questions for Leanne, next was a subject that I had raised at the previous meeting, which is whether there's any possibility of getting sampling done of soil more in the proximity of the Saint-Gobain plant. And I think in our waning months, we ought to be looking for problems where we think we might find them. So I don't know, Mike, is there any potential for that to get done? I think you're muted.
Sorry, yes. So, yeah, I had seen your email on that, and I'm sorry I hadn't gotten back to you yet. I mean, I think that kind of work is something that can be done, but I think that, your email suggested something, just got to quickly go out and get a few soil samples. It's a lot more, and unfortunately, it has to be a lot more sophisticated and organized than that in order to be of any use. And I'm certainly willing, I know you had addressed it, something that maybe we could work on with USGS. I think it's something we can talk about, but I think there's a lot more to it than maybe your email suggests.
Yeah. I don't doubt that. I think any information is better than none, though. Yeah.
You'd like to think that, but sometimes that actually isn't true. If you do it wrong, you can actually just create a lot of confusion, and you wish you didn't have any data. So that's what I don't mean to be flip about it. But I think it's something that I'd like to talk with Joe about it a little bit. Maybe we could have a call separately with the 3 of us to talk about the details of that.
Perfect. Gary.
That sort of segues. Are there any long-term plans once Saint-Gobain is gone and is closed to continue to monitor PFAS? Not necessarily just there. The chemicals are so ubiquitous. Are there any sort of generalized long-term plans to keep this at least percolating at some place near the surface so we can have some idea where we stand long-term?
Absolutely. There will be, you know, we're still waiting for a remedial action plan relative to the plant site and immediate environs, and that will be something that gets implemented and will have sampling associated with it for many years to come. Similarly, with respect to the groundwater monitoring and drinking water sampling, that's something that will, you know, there is a requirement for them to establish a groundwater management permit, which will be unlike any groundwater management permit we've ever had before. It'll have a lot more sampling points and data points, and that will go on for many, many years. So the fact that the plant is closing is in many respects irrelevant to the fact that we're going to be monitoring the effects of these releases for many, many years to come, both in groundwater and drinking water and in other media. So there'll be plenty of sampling going on long after the plant closure occurs.
Don?
Yes, I you know, to follow up on what Chris was asking about additional soil sampling, I think it would help kind of identify. I know there's two things that I'm thinking about that are going to impact that potential. Would be the soil standards, which I believe are still in development, PFAS soil standards. And I've been asked a few times about what is the policy regarding soil migration within the GMZ. I know when that Gilbert Crossing was developed, the Flatley land that abuts St. Gobain, I believe there was an imposed requirement that they couldn't migrate soil off of that property. But it begs the question about how far does that requirement stretch? That, you know, does it? To my understanding, is it doesn't go beyond that property. However, without additional soil testing, we don't really know how far the soil has been impacted away from that property. And then once or if the soil standards are implemented, it would almost seem to imply that we need to do additional investigation beyond the site to identify where additional soil could be above the standard. So it almost kind of ties in with what Chris is asking, and maybe through that sort of backdoor approach would be the way that we could get additional soil testing, because it would be useful to, like I'm saying, to compare what the soil concentrations are further away from the property once we have an enforceable soil standard. So it's just kind of a comment. I don't know that I'm asking a question here necessarily.
Sure.
Thanks.
No, it is a great topic and a great question that we're going to be, you know, working with for a long time. So to be clear, I mean, we know that soils are impacted over many dozens of square miles here, right? It's not just, you know, the immediate plant site. And I mean, if that were not true, we wouldn't have, you know, the extensive impacts to drinking water and groundwater that we see in the region. So we know that we've got that, and you know, we've already proposed our soil remediation standards, and candidly, we know that there are soils throughout the study area and even elsewhere in New Hampshire that exceed those standards, and the provisions for how they get implemented at sites that are being investigated and cleaned up are going to be complex, right? It's not going to be just, oh, you look up at the number, and if you're above the number, you got to remove the soil. That's not how it's going to work. It's going to be a somewhat complex, you know, paradigm for how we get the information, we get the data about the soil, but then we figure out what we're going to do about it, right? And obviously, you know, I think everybody knows we're not going to pick up all the soil in the top 10 feet of 5 towns and bring it somewhere else. That's not going to happen. Right? And nobody would want that to happen. People would be really disappointed in that result. But obviously we need to manage the potential risks. I mean, I will say it's important to understand that the soil remediation standards that we've worked on have been about protection of groundwater, right? So they are very stringent, they're very low, and we know that we exceed them in the study area because that's the mechanism. That's how we know that groundwater got contaminated there. So the good news is that the risks associated with direct contact with the soil, while they are real, exist at much higher concentrations than what we're talking about for these soil remediation standards. So this is something we're going to be looking at moving forward. You know, what our primary concern is going to be is if you have soils that have, you know, relatively low concentrations of PFAS, but above these soil cleanup standards that are designed based on protection of drinking water and groundwater, is not bringing a significant quantity of them somewhere to another site where we don't have impacts to groundwater. We're bringing such a substantial quantity of those soils to that site and placing them there is going to somehow, you know, potentially put the groundwater at that site at risk. So that's where we're going to really be focusing on, you know, those issues. And obviously that's the primary concern that we have, is that we don't, in terms of, you know, non-degradation policy. So we don't want people bringing so much soil to a site that has sufficient concentrations of contaminants in it, that bringing it to another site is going to imperil what may already be clean groundwater, what may be clean groundwater at that site. So it's not a simple thing. We've never dealt with kind of anything on this scale before. So we're going to be working on that, and you know, we work very closely with DOT for their plans for construction and, you know, augmentation of the interstate there, and trying to figure out what they can do and what they can do and how they can manage the great quantity of soils they're going to be moving to make sure that they don't create any new impacts to groundwater where groundwater is not previously impacted. So that's a lot, but that's really what we're going to be focusing on.
Maureen, go ahead. Thank you.
I know the issue of, you know, the groundwater focus has been huge and a huge amount of resources over the last few years and will continue. I'm wondering if New Hampshire has any plans to put a plan in place for addressing and looking at agriculture. I'm following the work of Maine very closely, and what I'm seeing there that's rather intriguing is in the areas of Fairfield and Unity in particular, where they know they had contamination of farmland. They're doing some phenomenal work up there that, if you're familiar with it, great, and if not, you have to connect. And one of the studies that they're doing over the last year or two, I'm not sure how long, but it's not new, is looking at chickens and eggs in areas that chickens are free ranging. And they're looking at, you know, it's the same, what do you call chickens? Flock? I think it's a flock. The same tribe, that's what I want to say, of chickens overall. They're still the same ones. And what they're noticing is fluctuations in the eggs and various PFAS seasonally, and this has puzzled them a bit. So to me, you know, from a scientific perspective and a food chain perspective, both, it's a really important area of study. It wasn't as simple as water and soil and, you know, different levels with rain and precipitation. Then they looked at the chickens on property, if they were going across the street, what was going on. They even brought earthworms into the proposal because they discovered that in certain seasons, in the spring in particular, the earthworm activity increases. The chicken feed on the earthworms. That is the current theory of why the levels were soaring in the spring. So they tied that work into what they're grappling with there as advisories. They're up to the point where they're saying in certain areas, don't eat more than 1 egg a week. I mean, wow, right? If you guys make eggs, usually you make 2, right? So that's pretty powerful. So I think I would really like to see, as we look at the, you know, health impacts of PFAS, you know, a little more attention to agriculture and food chain, and at least the data that they're doing there, you know, to bring that in and look across New Hampshire. Because in the USGS survey, I think it was my understanding that agricultural land was largely left out. And I can understand that it's private land and people might not want it looked at. And I mean, this is a, you know, this is a state with freedoms. So, you know, do we have plans for kind of looking at that whole topic area? It's vast. I don't even know if we have the resources, because it's very important, and it's very it's some good work is being done.
Sure, and in fact, we have already started doing some of that. We early on, when we were first exploring this, we looked at, you know, conditions in some of the farms around the impact area. More recently, we have done some work with NHTI regarding uptake by typical garden plants that people grow, and whether, you know, PFAS in the water or in the soil can have an impact on that. We also we have plans to look at eggs, and there's been some work done on eggs out on the seacoast, and also have looked at seafood and you know, oyster farms and things like that. So there's still work that's been done and work that's ongoing. We're partnering with Dartmouth College and others to look at that. You know, it's complicated, and you're right. We tended to avoid in our statewide sampling of soil agricultural areas, and there's a very specific reason for that, and that is that we know that that PFAS has been a component of soil amendments, of biosolids, of agricultural chemicals. So we were trying not to kind of frustrate our data with those kinds of potential. What we were trying to do with that work was really look at areas where we didn't have any reason to believe that there was a localized source of PFAS contamination. Having said that, you know, agriculture is where our food is grown, so we're certainly interested in that. You know, and it gets into, I mean, it gets into difficult issues. I mean, you know, I had some discussions about eggs recently, never really thought about it before, never realized it before. But in fact, backyard chickens are maybe not all that healthy for you, because the way that they're raised, they tend to do a lot more scratching in the soils than maybe production eggs at farms. And they end up taking up more heavy metals than chickens at farms. And as a result, the backyard eggs, which you think would be better for you, might actually have higher concentrations of heavy metals in them than an egg you buy at the supermarket, which doesn't really seem right, but that's the kind of, so the agricultural issues quickly become very complicated, because the reality is that, you know, if we look at how we raise our food in this country, we don't do it all with ivory snow. There are agricultural chemicals, pesticides, and everything else. And so, you know, it's a difficult issue, but it's something that, you know, that doesn't mean we don't study it, right? So we do have plans to look at those things, and trying to, you know, share the information that we collect, you know, as it becomes available. And I know that there are a number of studies, collaborative studies, that we're planning to do either with Dartmouth or UNH in the coming months and years that I think will help to shed some light on this. I do want to talk a little bit about Maine, because yeah, we're very familiar with what Maine has been struggling with, and you know, they have, I won't say their situation is unique in terms of what's occurred, but I think that the magnitude of it is somewhat unique, and that is because those areas of Maine, unfortunately, a number of farms which were later converted or thought to be converted to organic farms were sites where biosolids, both wastewater treatment sludge and paper manufacturing sludge were applied as soil amendments. And unfortunately, there were a couple of plants that used a lot of PFAS in their production processes at the paper mills. And the sludges from those plants contained an inordinate amount, or you know, of PFAS. And as a result, there's some pretty widespread contamination in certain regions of Maine with PFAS in soil where those sludges were applied. Mill sludge, paper mill sludges, or what we used to call short paper fiber sludge, were applied in New Hampshire with biosolids, but to a much lesser extent, and also sourced from other plants, other mills that didn't necessarily use such large quantities of PFAS. So while we have expressed concern about this, we certainly know that there's PFAS in biosolids generally from wastewater treatment plants, municipal plants. The work that we did with USGS, in addition to looking at just trying to develop general soil remediation standards, also focus on a particular site where we knew that biosolids have been land applied, and trying to learn as much as we could about how those PFAS get distributed in soil and groundwater at those sites. And that work was intended to help influence setting a standard for land application of biosolids in New Hampshire, where, you know, we would want to be sure that a certain, you know, whatever level of PFAS would be too much for for land applying biosolids. That work is still ongoing, and Anthony Druin, who I know many of you have probably talked to, who heads up our residuals program here in our water division, has done a tremendous amount of work on that and continues to work on that. So there's a lot going on there, but I just wanted to, maybe more than you wanted to know, but I wanted to share with you that we're very aware and certainly talking with our main colleagues about this. But again, I think I'm happy to say I don't think we have the degree of problem that they have experienced in a number of regions in Maine.
Thank you. It was good for you to put all that out there because it's such an important area. In the eggs, I know myself quite a few years ago, not too long into this, probably by 2017, realizing what I knew and learned about PFAS, I switched quickly from the cage-free or free-range eggs, which surprised my husband. He's like, "What? I'm confused. I thought this is what we were doing." And I told him why. And he just looked at me and he's like, "Oh my God, what else is it in?" The studies and the samplings that you refer to in New Hampshire, maybe it's because of the complexities of having to work with and negotiate a known polluter, but we all know here that these samplings haven't been done in this area. So I would just like to maybe be optimistic, and maybe when they're shuttered, maybe we can do some of that sampling. I think it's important for people who've been exposed chronically through water to just be educated on what their other exposure sources can be in the community, so they can, if they choose to, they can make those choices to protect their health. That would be something that I would really like to see done in the future, some of that work in our area. We have a lot of backyard, farmers, just eggs alone, and everyone's unaware, they really are, and surface water and all the rest of the stuff. Thank you.
This is Rich Lascelles. Can you hear me?
Yes.
A question for Maureen. I'm just curious about this site in Maine. Geographically, that farm that you were talking about, how far was that from the source of the pollution?
Those two farms, one was organic and Unity. That farmer, there's some group who's now purchased it. It's quite fascinating because these farmers are kind of out of business. Their blood levels are insane. Their families, their cows, their animals. It's really, really sad, which is why Maine has, very agricultural roots in Maine. So they've really rallied behind. Now it's a research site, but the known polluter is not there. They don't have industrial polluter. It's directly attributed to land spreading that was done in the past. And it's astonishing, and as Mike said before, if you identify soil that's contaminated, you can't say, hey, scoop it up and bring it somewhere else. Where are you going to put this? So they are researching on the Unity property in particular, and they are looking at all kinds of things, even remediation based with soil. And it's really, some good work is being done there. And some funds have been given. They did do some extensive testing and open up, to all agricultural. Not many states have done that, because when Michigan started testing in this area a number of years ago, they started finding it. And then they were like, oh no, let's just put out guidance, because the more you test, the more you find. At that point, 5 years ago, what are you going to do about this? It just creates a lot of chaos and confusion. So public education. But no, even Kennebuck and Wells, very area that you don't think of as farmy, 5-6 years ago, high levels of PFAS in the water, attributed to, again, it was soil into wells. There was no industrial polluter. It was all really biosolid related. So this is a huge, huge area. And there's been families who reported blood levels that are very, very high, who have not had contaminated water, and who are related to people on some of these farms that produce meat, but they get the meat from the family farm, and that's their protein source. And that is another area, so this goes on and on and on. This is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. And I think we need to help people in exposed areas really understand where their exposure is coming from, so they can truly reduce their body burden.
Has there been any guidance put out, official guidance from the state, informing people of the possibility of soil issues and pollution into eggs and meat and so forth?
No.
That's a question. Has there been any official guidance?
No, we have asked for it in southern New Hampshire for a while, and it's been complicated getting that, and I do understand why. But I would propose, people work collaboratively on a fact sheet for PFAS, which was very well done. It's on the DES site. Dartmouth has it on their Geisel School of Medicine page. Maybe we need to look at another work group who looks at this area of food impacts and all these other areas, and maybe we can put a fact sheet together and put that out there for people to just have that information. Maybe that would be a good solution. I'm not sure what could be done, but I think education is very important on this topic, given the carcinogen. The WHO just came out in the major international cancer associations a week or two ago, moving PFOA in particular from a probable to a definitive carcinogen. So that's just one of what we are exposed to.
It is a touchy subject because you're talking about people's livelihoods, and have to be careful.
You do, and you have to be careful. I was really careful years ago about messaging in my community about wastewater impacts, because we as a community were working hard together to get what we needed to make sure our water was PFAS free, and everything that we needed from the state and the federal government, we wanted to stand aligned with state reps, senators, residents, MVD commissioners, town council, wastewater facility, all of us together. So if you start, going on a rant about wastewater and sludge, now you have a problem with your town. So it was a very tricky area to talk about. And we haven't talked about this publicly because there's repercussions. And I understand that. It comes down to money, right? So, but we have to grapple with it at this point. We really do. We've done a pretty good job on water overall, and now it's time, I think, to venture into those other pathways to the environment and to our bodies.
We have family farms in Litchfield that are almost 300 years old.
Yes. Yeah.
Other questions?
Thank you.
There's some good stories, Rich, about, you can look this up. You can look up and find it, and you can find videos of these stories, and you can find out what's being done elsewhere. There's also a federal action in process for a farmers relief bill, a federal bill that will really look at this issue so farmers can have guidance, help, health, support, blood tests and compensation, and maybe like Unity, some refurbishing of this. But it's not that simple. There's farmers who've spoken about generation after generation of their relationship with their land and their cattle and things like this. And it's heartbreaking, but it isn't going to go away. We have to do something about it in a responsible and respectful fashion.
I agree.
Thank you.
Other comments on this subject? If not, I'll just note that, we've talked about advice to backyard gardeners, and, Mike, you made a point a long time ago that the, container backyard gardens replacement may, from the big box store, bring in contaminated soils and amendments, and there just are no standards for those consumer items at this point. So, unfortunately, in addition to the family farms, the backyard gardeners are left to their own devices, and that has to do with what's available on the consumer market as much as anything. So, daunting problem. I agree. All right, moving forward, I guess, our next meeting will be January 12th, 2024 at 1 p.m. I see that there are some people who are listening in, but I do not see any comments. And that brings us to election of chair. I am glad to continue doing this for the next period of time, although you would not get any protests from me if somebody else wanted to do it. So, no. Gary, you're muted, but I'm.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second by Rosemary? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Rich, say yes, and
Aye.
yes, I'm going to do it. Thank you
Aye.
very much. I'm very honored to do that. I appreciate your support. And with that, we are adjourned. It is 2:14 p.m. Thank you all. See you in January. Happy New Year.
You take care. Bye now.